Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, where today I have a very special guest, another international guest, Jeff Black, who's come on the pod. And he's going to be talking about his journey, which is very intriguing, very exciting for me to hear about, because I actually heard about you from my mentor, Austin. And I was looking for someone to come on the pod to talk about marijuana, potentially class A's and things like this in regards to bodybuilding. And he was like, I know a guy, and you are going to talk about your journey, etc. But he was like, reach out to Jeff, and he might be able to touch on a few of those subjects under that umbrella. And then we're going to talk about your journey of, well, it's Brittle to Unbreakable, isn't it?
Correct. That's the name of my book that will come out hopefully later this year or early next year. Brittle to Unbreakable, My Journey to Redefine Suffering.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the listeners already are going to go, okay, so I probably get a brief understanding into what they're going to talk about. But thank you, of course, for your time today. And I guess, would we start right when you got your diagnosis, or do you think talk about before that?
So I was actually born with it, and this was in 1980, and it was long before the internet. And they didn't know for the first 6 weeks. I was born breech, so the doctor used forceps to pull me out, and he shattered both my femurs when he did it. And so I would cry like hell because when you pick up a baby, you pick a baby up by its legs. So I was just like inconsolable. And then my parents were like, this isn't right. So they went to the local hospital. And at first, they're like, did you drop this kid? All sorts of shit, the usual. Rather than actually like try to help, they're like, oh, you did something wrong. And then 6 weeks later, they took me to a specialist in Kansas City, and he diagnosed me with osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a brittle bone disease. And there's 8 types of them. So you have type 1, which would be, you would never know. It's just very normal looking, kind of like me. I'm type 4. So what that means is I'm more prone to breaking than you. And then there's like example type 8, which is my chief of staff son, where she was going over a speed bump and he broke a part of his back. And then some of them sneeze and they break their ribs. So it's very wide ranged. And affects 25,000 in the US total. So it's
Really?
extremely, extremely rare. Me and my youngest son actually have it. My oldest one does not. So, which is very intriguing. And Keegan's is completely different than mine. So he seems to have it a little bit less than I did. So the bigger issue is when you break a bone, a normal person, you heal back stronger in that spot.
Yeah.
We heal back weaker. So we're more prone to breaking in the same spot over and over and over and over again. I lived a life until my skateboard accident when I was 8. I played baseball, basketball. I could run and keep up with the kids. I couldn't tell a difference because it's like a hidden disability. But I remember when I was 5, I was walking up the stairs and like I couldn't walk anymore, like my leg broke. And I remember being like 5, like this is weird. You know what I mean? Like, but you still didn't see that. And there was nothing to it to be able to like go, okay, well, why am I different than everybody else? So I never really noticed that much different, paid that much difference until my skateboard accident. But that's pretty much the background of it. You can think of it as continuous osteoporosis for your whole life. That
Yeah.
no matter what you do, it's never going to get better.
I think that's actually what you say there. It's relevant to, I talk to people that get, signs of like arthritis or maybe get a diagnosis. And I think part of it, a big, big part of it in my experience is the acceptance of something like this rather than, okay, so what can I do to make this go away? I work with people to talk through it about, okay, so what can we do to help your quality of life with this for longevity purposes? And acceptance is very hard for a lot of people.
100%, and I talk about this in my book. I wanted to die more than I wanted to live. And I never related to a God that was all loving and all caring because I was in constant pain. And I think a lot of people try to always find the magic bullet. And we know that as coaches, whether it's the pill to drop 20 pounds, the pill to put 20 pounds on. And just some of us just get that. Like I have arthritis all throughout my body because of my disease. And in wintertime, I just ache. And that's just kind of part of it. And I think some people, everyone was put, I think, whether you believe in something above or not, the universe made us exactly the way we're meant to be. And I think the journey that we go on is something we're meant to always walk. And just a lot of us choose to sit down and stop walking. And I'm not one of those people. I'm just kind of like, well, what's next? Surely there's something better next. And I've always adopted that mindset to it. I try to tell people who are in constant pain, I'm like, look, that pain's going to be there whether you sit your ass down or you go walking 5 miles. So what would you rather remember your life by? Because when I got into coaching, the one thing that stood out to me, and I started in person, this was before like online coaching was big, and you only had a few people back in 2005 who were doing it, like Chris Aceto and all them, mostly the bodybuilding side that I was aware of. And I remember talking to these older people, and they were always like, they always had regrets, like just regrets. And I just remember being like, I think the goal of life is to die with the least amount of regrets possible, because everybody I talked to had tons of them. And I was like, holy shit, I can't live this way. Like, I might as well go ahead, and if you're going to, life's meant to be colored outside the lines. And I don't think we give ourselves enough forgiveness to do that. And I think life would be a lot more enjoyable for all of us if we gave ourselves permission to just kind of like, all right, this is what this is. I cannot fix this. I've given it my best effort, but I still must go forward.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is very common when you get into bodybuilding for, I say the right reasons, but more like the longevity of physique development. I base this on, when you compete, it's subjective and accolades are so cool. Like, of course, we go in it to win it, and often that's what drives us. But the journey that you go on through physique development, it's so rewarding. And actually, I think when you're in it, like us, sometimes you think lots of people do it, but it's a very small percentage in the world that do it. And there's a reason for that, isn't there?
Yeah, it's because a lot of people can't do the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And that was something that I learned when I was going through all my surgeries as a kid, was you still have to do it every day. Like, what I mean? Like, it was like every day I had to, correlate pain as progress. And that didn't go well for me in my later years because I was a kid who correlated that. So when I got in my 20s, there was no mental health ever talked about, ever. Nobody ever sat me down and was like, hey, Jeff, how do you feel? This is in the late 80s, 90s. And so I associated with pain as progress for everybody. Like, if you dated me, I was like, if you're not in pain, we're not progressing. And that's just a bad way of looking at it.
Yeah, I laugh, but yeah.
I went through my stuff, and then a guy came on the other side and was like, well, shit, okay, that didn't work too well, but it worked in other areas. And I think just everybody wants a life that they see, but don't understand that the work that goes on behind it to get there is a lot harder than what they want to believe it is.
Yeah. And you compete, right?
Oh yeah, I did Masters Nationals 5 weeks ago. Yeah, placed outside top 5.
Yep.
6 or 7, depending upon if you listen to the girl backstage or you see NPC news, but you never know. And it was good because in January I couldn't really walk. I had a bad hip, and I went and saw 3 different doctors, and they were like, you need a hip replacement. And then this one was like, hey, your back is broken here. And I had spondylolisthesis, which your back breaks forward. And then I went and saw this surgeon, and he was like, well, when do you want to compete? I was like, well, I'm going to do a qualifier in June and do Masters Nationals. He goes, you won't make it. He goes, you'll tap out for the pain. I was like, oh, I like a challenge. You know what I mean? So I ended up rehabbing all the way back through that. And I think that was a test. Like, was I really, because I'm 42. So it was a question of, was I done with bodybuilding? Because with my bone disease, I'm the only one who's ever done this. It's not been done ever. And I've shoved it so far that I'm kind of like, do I want to shove it more? You know what I mean? And really put the nails in the coffin. And then I decide, well, fuck it. I'll see if I could get a prep in me. Because I knew what would happen once I went into prep, once I went into that mode of this had to be about progress every day, that I knew I'd either get myself out or it'd be like, nope, this is really real and I have to fix it. And I was very lucky that I got on the other side of it. I didn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the qualities you've already spoken about mindset wise with dealing with pain, I would imagine lend themselves very well to prep and what you have to tolerate. Or I say have to tolerate. I'm a big advocate of saying that this is a choice when you go into a prep or you choose this life. And dealing with hunger and the things that happen during a prep, like I say, I'd imagine your toleration lends itself very well.
Well, it kills me when people be like, I'm hungry. I'm like, no shit, there's supposed to be some discomfort and growth. Um, and I guess that's what I look for. I enjoy the most thing I enjoy about bodybuilding is, even though there's a difference in my legs and you can see it, I can still be the most conditioned guy in my class. So I look at it like, here's a legally disabled, in quotes, crippled person making normal people look fat. What's your excuse? You just don't want it as bad. And I think people, when they get into the sport, they get into it for the social media. I tell people this when they hire me as a coach. I'm like, do you want to do the competition to make your friends feel bad? Or you want to do the competition to make yourself, the competitor in you, hungrier? Because there's two different mindsets. Because you'll get people be like, I want to do the show. And I'm like, but you're like 4 years away from that potential. And no one wants to hear that. They want to hear I'm 4 months away. And it's like, no, it don't work like that. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I think bodybuilding gave me so much that I can never repay it back. That's why in my book, I talk very highly of it. Even though it's very drug related, um, and tends to get a bad connotation because of the drug use. I was like, look, there's so much good in here that we always just find that one thing that we don't like and just harp on it. And I'm like, there's so much other shit that's good about it. Like, I learned discipline of time, discipline of self, mastery of my emotions, mastery of my mental states, and that matters because life is every day a mental and emotional challenge.
Yes, for sure. I talk about this a lot about prep. You spoke about like the mindset mastery. Do you find that when you're in a prep, I've certainly found in the past that pretty much every prep I have some sort of almost epiphany into something I want to maybe change in my life, or something comes back from my past and I'm almost forced to deal with it when I'm running a huge deficit for X amount of time and whatever. I find that I have these sort of big life-changing events. Is that something you've had?
Yes, I tell everybody who ever wants to compete, I'm like, you will always learn something about yourself through every prep you do. And I've had over 20 of them. And I can tell you that I've always learned something about myself. Even this past year, I was like, man, I literally had more doctors again tell me I couldn't do something. And I was able to kind of defy them, but I was able to believe in myself at a level where I think I had walked the year before, kind of like, well, I don't know what I want to do, and da 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 da. And it kind of reset me and gave me focus back again. But you're right. When you do a prep, there's stuff that comes out of the woodwork. You might have an ex that starts talking to you. You're like, why Satan? I don't want you. You know what I mean? And you might have, just your whole life blow up financially. And you're still like, how the hell do I afford this? But you figure it out. And I think that's the part of prep that most people don't focus on. They just focus on what they look like in the mirror, what social media is telling them. And I'm like, there's so much intrinsic that comes out of that I don't know. I think my character and who I am as a person is better because of me doing preps.
Yeah, I really do relate to what you're saying there, Jeff, about not sort of bad mouthing bodybuilding, because this again goes around a lot on social media, or when people do a prep and they blame things coming out on bodybuilding. And if I have a chance to speak to, someone that's doing this, I'm like, often it's something that's already there that you've experienced in your life, maybe some sort of trauma or whatever that may be. And that comes out when you explore doing a prep. And it almost upsets me, and it sounds like it probably does for you, when people badmouth bodybuilding, because I'm like, it's not actually bodybuilding, it's normally something that's already happened, right?
Well, majority of people who badmouth bodybuilding don't understand it, and they can't even figure out what the fuck not to put in their mouth. And then the former competitors were the ones who just were saucy because they thought they were something they weren't. And nowadays in gyms, when I was coming up, and I was very lucky, I got around a bunch of bodybuilders when I first started, who taught me how to use gear correctly, who taught me how to eat and all that stuff. I could tell you there's way more positives than negatives, but nowadays, there's maybe one or two competitors per gym. So of course everybody's gassing you up, telling you that you're going to be great, but you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And you should remember that. And that's the part of the journey that most people miss. It's not a journey of greatness, what others see you as. it's a journey of greatness of what you see yourself as.
Yeah. And I'd imagine, you know, for you, when you have those darker days, when you're suffering with pain, I reference this about the darker days anyway, in a ordinary prep, as it were. You know, if someone's taking on this challenge, they're not there when you're really fucking struggling. It's you. And that's when, of course, that internal development, that self-worth, you know, you gain this almost confidence, and then that can, of course, be placed with ego, or it can be, you can remain humble and go, wow, I'm growing as a person. And like you said earlier about the universe, like there's all this sort of stuff that happens. I love that you said that, because it's super cool, because it's like, what is my next challenge to face? And with what you've already mentioned, maybe we could delve into your first prep and how that was with your brittle bone.
So I waited 10 years before I competed.
Yeah.
I started bodybuilding when I was 15. After being bullied, I I was called crippled a lot. So I didn't go to school. I was pretty much homeschooled from third grade all the way through eighth grade,
Okay.
freshman year. I went to school for 1 year, my sixth grade year, all the way through, and then I had to have more surgeries. And they told me I'd never walk without a cane or a crutch at some point, or a wheelchair after the sixth grade, one of those surgeries. I was kind of like in the back of my head, like, fuck that. I'm gonna walk into school my freshman year. And I did. And I walked with a limp. And I had these kids, you know, who shit talking is what it is. I think people associate bullying different. Bullying would be like mass intimidation. That was just more shit talking. But at the time, you know, it was, you know, it hurt my feelings. So they broke into my locker one day and they wrote on my glasses, cripple and short. And I put them on in class, and then they all started laughing. So that day I went home back to the gym after my mom picked me up. After I went home, she took me back to the gym. And I got on the leg press, and I ended up hairline fracturing my pelvis left to right. And that was on like a Thursday. That Monday, I walked to school. I didn't even use crutches. I just dealt with it. And then a few months later, I got mad one day, and I grabbed him and just started punching him in the face in the middle of class. And I got suspended. And my mom wasn't mad because I stood up for myself. But she had to go to Kroger's, which is a grocery store here in the States. And I'm walking down the magazine aisle, and I stop and I see Flex magazine. And I'm
Yeah.
like, holy shit. If I could be that fucking big, nobody will mess with me. So of course I bought it, and I'm dissecting it. My mom's like, that's gross. I'm like, I don't care, woman, I'm gonna be this, you know. And I began that journey, and I waited 10 years. And it wasn't, the only reason I jumped in is because I had gotten into personal training part-time by then, nights, because I was a full-time officer with the Department of Homeland Security, and I just didn't like being in a government job because it's a cesspool. So anybody
Yeah.
who's listening knows what I'm talking about.
Silly.
And I ended up getting fifth out of 18. And I was the lightest guy by like 30 pounds in my class. I remember being so tickled shitless. I'm like, oh my God, my little disabled ass just got fifth out of 18. And then the next week I did fifth in an open class. I skipped the juniors, went into open. And I was just hooked at that point. And I've just been a student to improvement of myself. Like, it has nothing, my placings I don't give a shit about. Like, and people at one point, you know, I used to maybe care in the sense of like, oh yeah, like this is brutal. Because to me, I have a complete upper body. I've got a great right leg, except for my left leg just sucks. And I lose the symmetry round, and, you know, quarter turns, things like that. But then I realized, like, Jeff, you really love this. Like, it's not about the trophy. It's not about the placing. It's like your actual love for the development of yourself. And ever since then, I just can't stop. So I made a decision that when I hit 45, I'd be done competing, because that's 30 years I'm pursuing bodybuilding. And I'm kind of like, how many people can say that? Most people can't even diet more than 3 fucking days, let
Amen.
alone like do, like, can't be a relationship longer than 3 weeks nowadays. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I go down a list, and I was like, that'd be cool to be able to cherry on top 30 years and say I did something for 30 years, like one whole pursuit. So that's kind of what it is for me.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things, isn't it? It's like, well, you know, I'll do X amount of time, and then it's like, I'll keep it open, because you never really know what's going to happen. But I feel like if you are in it for the right reasons, like we've spoken about already, you're always going to be a bodybuilder, but it's different degrees. So you may not compete, but I'd imagine you're always going to, hit protein targets or do your steps or all of those things that we do.
100%. I actually, the surgeon, my girlfriend was there when I went and saw the one for my hip, and she referred me to the spinal. She goes, I honestly don't know how you do what you do. She goes, because your x-rays, your MRIs show like, she goes, I have people in here who have this in our own Percocets and this and that and the other thing. And I'm just like, nah, I'm fine. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a dull ache, but I've learned to just deal with it. And she's like, I will give you this advice though. She goes, I believe if you ever stop, that it'll get really bad for you. And so I was like, okay, mental note, it never stops. But the act of actual competition itself, because of the gear use and things like that, I've got 2 kids. I'd like to be able to see my grandkids, albeit though I've told both my boys, I was like, something happens to me, don't be the little bitches on the internet who go, oh my God, steroids ruin them. I'm like, I knew damn right well what I was doing when I was 18, when I took them. And I've been on growth hormone since I was 12 years old. So you're talking 30 years of growth, and then over 20 something years of gear use off and on. And I told him, I'm like, I lived a life that no one ever told me I would live. So don't ever for 1 second think that I leave this world sad about anything. I leave this world happy as shit, knowing that I pushed the boundaries on something that couldn't happen. And I've showed them, like the parents who message me, who find me on social media, who are like, oh my God, my kid has a Y. And they're basically like, put your kid in a bubble, and here you are like pushing 100-pound dumbbells and doing all this crazy shit. And even the kids, so many kids like in their teenage and young adults message me and send me their workouts with OI. And it's awesome to see, because I think defiance is a good thing, especially when you're trying to defy the odds and you're trying to defy what society says or anyone else says of you. You are your own fate and you make it. That's what I believe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even with gear, isn't it? It's one of those things I talk about it a lot on the podcast. Now, one of my missions right at the start was to up the awareness of like the, in inverted commas, safer use model and talk about PEDs openly, because
do you believe in the safer use model?
Well, I'm trying to, for me, right at the start, it was trying to get that message across that, especially young girls or people that are just getting into the sport, that they're trying, things from their local gym owner, or they're getting into just popping whatever it is, Anavar, different things, and they're not really understanding the side effects and what the repercussions could be. And then I myself delved into the safer use model, and I wanted to talk about that openly. I'm not really affiliated with anyone as such, and just get some, I guess, education across without it being this like gear is really bad, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of finding out what gear works best for you.
Yeah.
So, for example, you'll probably die when you hear this, but when I do my prep, I drop my testosterone to 100 and I put my tren up real high. Like, as in, like, I'll be on tren at 600 milligrams the last 4 weeks. And my blood work, I just got back. My LDL was 104, my triglycerides were 61, and my HDL was 32.
Again, it's
your genetic response to it. And I've seen clients who do the same thing. Like Jason, Scooby Prep. He's my coach, been my coach for over 10 years. And he's like, I hate you. I do training and my HDL's 2. And I'm like, yeah, but that's what I try to tell people. Like, I've seen some girls, I think you've seen this, 2.5 milligrams, 5 milligrams of VAR goes so long. Yeah. So far. And I'm like, why would you go to 20 or 25 if you continue to change? Especially with GH, insulin, and some other good stuff out there that's non-anabolic pathways. Some of the bikini girls I've seen tren, I'm like, why do you need tren? Like, you're in a bikini. So I think what you're doing is great. My opinion is, I think you can agree here. I think the safer use model is probably good for your first-time competitors, probably your average weekend warriors. But if you're really trying to compete for that pro card, it's questions you got to ask yourself, risk and reward.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I love about exploring it, because, when people go down this route, first of all, I don't know if what your thoughts are on this, but I always try and recommend exploring your natural potential first, unless you want to just fucking go all in and you're like, I'm a bodybuilder, that's it. But I feel like maybe doing a prep first, doing it naturally, seeing if you can do the prep in its entirety and get on stage, see if you actually enjoy it, and then look at this route. And of course, do it from an informed approach, because that's not just the coach that should be telling you, that should be the client doing the research as well. I'm sure you will agree.
I agree 100%. When I work with guys, I'm like, hey, here's what it is. These are the things you should be looking at, and these are the things you should consider. But I don't really push it with first-time competitors. I'm like, why don't you see if you actually like this shit? See if you like crossing across stage, because I've had one of my buddies, he got peeled out of his mind. He did it once, and he was like, I will never do it again. I do not like being on stage, da 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 da. The end. You know what I mean? And he's finally just doing a little bit of gear and playing his way he wants. And I have some guys who they get done with just one show and they're like, okay, I want to go all in. And I'm like, okay, let's define what all in looks like. And I think that's where you have to start defining. And I know this much, in my opinion, is if you can't do good at regional shows on a decent amount of gear, then you have to really ask yourself, where does it go at the higher levels? You know what I mean? And can your body tolerate it? I think that we're very, very fortunate to live in a time coaches know so much about nutrition and blood work that you can really refine some stuff if
Yeah.
you're smart.
Yeah, for sure. And also, if from a female point of view, if those risk versus reward, so like you say, if it's beyond regionals and you're going for IFBB Pro card or you're competing internationally, etc., and you're happy with the risks of virilization, then that's your personal decision. Fucking go for it.
I
Why
agree.
not? Yeah. If that's the route you want to take, and you know what it's like, some female physiques, it's unbelievable. Like, it's so fascinating for me.
I have a question for you. Do you find that most women are willing to throw things to the cautions or throw caution to the wind a little bit more than they should? And you as a coach kind of have to be like, all right, we're in a Supra. I drive a Toyota Supra. It's my dream car I got after I finally got one last year. When you're like, you need to be driving in like a Chevy Malibu for a little bit and kind of get used to how that thing feels before you start ramping it. I can appreciate people wanting to win out of the gate, but it's kind of like with gear, I've always looked at it similar to alcohol. Why would you just go pound a whole bottle of whiskey when maybe 4 beers would have done the trick? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely love this, Jeff, because you know what? Some people would listen to even where you spoke about trend there and they go, well, I'm going to fucking take that. And this is what it's frustrating at times, because this could be people that, jump on a bit of gear, really like their response. They have a good response, right? They go to the gym, maybe not going to compete. They just aesthetic reasons, whatever. And then they end up taking huge amounts, and it's because, I look better, I feel better, I can train harder. But then there's no consideration to, okay, so what's maybe going to happen as you continue down this path? And like you say there, that analogy of actually drive here and then maybe step it up, because you can titrate most things up, right? Rather than like,
Yep.
let's fucking take it all. And then, whatever side effects can occur.
100%. And that, I figured when I got into bodybuilding and I started really seeing the gear usage, because the guys I was around were real honest with me. Like the guy who like kind of took me underneath his wing was like, I run 2 grams of test a week. And I was like, holy shit, and he's like, but you don't need to start there. This is where I started. He goes, a lot of it's your genes. And I was like, well, my granddad, even though he was an asshole to me, he drank literally 24 Bud Heavies a day and smoked 3 packs of Parliament cigarettes and died peacefully in his sleep at 87. Not one thing wrong with him. And then my uncle's walking around at 70, still doing the same damn thing, smoking and drinking all day. And he's healthy as could be. You know what I mean? And then you have some people who smoke and they've got cancer in 5 years and they're dead. And I think a lot of it is you have so many tools, I guess is what I'm getting at. And so many brilliant people out there. You should be able to find what works best for you and be able to do it in the long set. And I think what you see now is social media. And that kind of ruined and skewed it a little bit, because you'll see kids suddenly like bet it big on Bitcoin and they're driving a Lambo. You know what I mean? And that's like 1 out of like 400 million people who did that, And I guess what I always digress back to is you're not that special. So think you're not, and just go at it. And if you are, even better, you know what I mean? Even better. But take the long route. And I'm glad I did. I think bodybuilding's been more fulfilling to me,
I
you
certainly
know, because it's like I can never, even if I did go pro, let's just hypothetical here. I couldn't ever compete with those motherfuckers. It is like my friend who's a super heavy is he's a great friend, but he turned pro and he's like, I don't want to go to the next level because of what I'd have to do. So he literally spent years chasing this and then it stopped.
yeah,
And you know what kind of depression that brings about to a person? Like you got
yeah,
to ask yourself all these questions. And I think what the sport, I don't judge because I couldn't figure out the women divisions. Like I could look at men's physique and be like, that guy. I could look at classic and be like, that guy. I could look at bodybuilding and be like, that guy. But when I get in there, I'm like, all right, well, bikini wellness and figure and physique, holy shit, all y'all kind of look alike. Oh my God. Like, you know, like how do you start breaking this out? You know what I mean? Like, and it's tough. I think women have it harder than men. And I think that's where you get on a slippery slope with women and gear use, in my opinion.
yeah, for sure. It's crazy. Like for me, I did years as a natty and I explored that, you know, did off seasons in between, etc., and worked my way up. And I really like what you said there about, you know, actually that journey. And I found that I invested a lot of years of not placing, of feeling like I didn't even get looked at. And it was fucking so hard, Jeff. Like mentally, you know, I was doing 8-10 month preps as a natty. It was fucking long, and I was going, you know, shredded, and then no one looking at me, and it was one show of a season, then it's into off season, and I'm like,
Like
oh,
another 8 to 10 months for natties. Like it's really long. And that's why I tell people the difference between natty and enhanced is it's just a matter of time. I'm like, with enhanced, you can recover it quicker and get back to work. Natty, you got to go through that whole like reverse back up, restoration, chill, let your body like get back normal. Some people take 6 months to get that. And then you got to go to an off season for at least a year to kind of really do what you need to do. So you're competing about once every 2 years as a natty, right?
yeah,
Well,
for sure.
18 to 24 months, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I found that one of my big contributors to going assisted was my thyroid was tanked and
Mm.
my test was tanked. Like I did 10 years back to back competing, and I don't think I probably slept for those 10 years properly. And I'm preaching to the choir here, but you know what you end up picking up with doing this to yourself, this sort of extreme sport and doing it back to back. I was in a very unhappy space at the time. So this was like my outlet, and I just basically fucked myself. So going assisted and implementing T3, T4, growth hormone, etc., that was a big motivator for me to actually deal with some of my markers and then add in, you know, using exposures, etc., for being assisted. But it's very cool to explore this, and I'm sure you find this with clients. The physique response when you go assisted compared to natty is fucking nuts.
It is nuts. And what's even more interesting when the clients go, wow. And I'm like, yeah. But you know, you get guys now, and you see this with women. Like women are coming at you with total testosterone at 20. Men are like 200. And I'm like, you guys are like 25 years old. Like, what the fuck? And then you put them on some TRT and they feel so much better.
Yeah.
And that's where they win. I think that's a big thing. I always tell people, like, if your hormones like, start with TRT, get some confidence, get it going, get used to it, and then see where you go from there. Especially if you're coming out of the natty world.
Yeah, explore it, like, well, like exploring your natural potential, because like you described there, you know, it's all well and good thinking about doing a prep, and then you get on stage and some people it's like, I ain't fucking doing that again. Like it's just not for me. But also you touched on, which I like, is that you can still explore PEDs for the route of physique development. You don't have to compete.
Right, 100%.
Yeah. And a lot of people, you know, like TRT, things like this, a lot of people considering that now over in the UK. Is it similar over where you are?
Yeah, it is blowing up over here. We have what we call pop-up HRT clinics, which are just a bunch of people who are like, hey, I'm very well qualified to do this. And here's you a bunch of hormones. Good luck, you know. And then you're as a coach seeing women at total testosterone at 300, free at 40, and you're like, holy shit, what are you taking? Like, there was one clinic that was giving women like 250 tests a week. Yeah, yeah. That's why Jason ended up opening his own HRT clinic.
Yeah,
So because it got to be so out of control. I mean, we were seeing girls like, you know, yeah, women just don't respond when their testosterone's that high, in my opinion.
yeah, for
It's
sure.
almost like they
And
freeze up.
yeah, you spoke as well about VAR, like that you can get quite a lot from 2.5, 5. That's something I think it's being explored more now rather than jumping to like 10 or 20 initially. It's like actually you could try, like you say, 2.5 or 5.
Well, the issue with VAR for most women or most men who take it is the cholesterol problem, right? It lowers HDL, it can raise your hematocrit, things like that. But women usually have lower hematocrit and HDLs are sky high. And I find they tolerate VAR at 5 milligrams better than almost a testosterone replacement dose. Because if you forget your shots, or if one day you go sub Q and the next day you go intramuscular and then you go back, like it can really mess some stuff up. So I tend to be of the mindset when I'm out there in left field. I know. I mean, I've done psychedelics and everything, so I'm not going to sit here and say I'm not renegade. But I almost try to persuade women, like, hey, see if that doctor will give you a prescription for VAR for the first time. Just run it for 12 weeks. Just see how you feel. Get used to it, and then maybe from there doing your T therapy.
Oh, well, you touched on there about psychedelics. I can't let that pass, Jeff. I mean, of course, that's what I mentioned to Austin. Is this like an exploration in regards to a medical condition or?
What got me into psychedelics was I hated living. It's why I'm a touchy person on subjects, but like we had this talk one day at the gym. We were talking about kids transitioning at like 9, 10 years old from boys to girls, girls to boys. And one of my clients, like, I think you should be able to do it because of the hormones. That I said, but here's my question. He goes, what? I go, at 9 years old to 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, probably up until I walked into high school, because by then I had a little confidence. I wanted to die. What would you think if my mom let me die?
Mm-hmm.
They're all like, and I'm like, how's it any different? It's just me transitioning out of the earth plane into somewhere else. You know what I mean? It's a transition. And people be like, that's not the same. I'm like, no, but the mind, my mental state is what I speak to in regards to that. I had gotten into my 30s, 32, I had a suicide attempt. And I literally went about my business the next day, like nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like nothing. And then I went on all the antidepressants. I've been on them off and on. And you know what it is. They give you Paxil and that one don't work. So they're like, all right, we'll take this one. All right, we'll take this one. And before you know it, you're on 3 or 4 of them. Your tech don't work. You don't sleep. And then you're just a zombie walking around through the world like completely numb and emotional. So why would I want to live at that point anymore? Um, and then I'm an avid reader. I read like 80 books a year. That's what I do during my cardio time, just because I don't like TV.
Yeah.
And I was reading this book by Stephen Kotler called Stealing Fire. And he was talking about microdosing psychedelics. And, I mean, I was raised Republican, red, Catholic, God this, God that. So I was like, what? A Schedule 1 drug? So what intrigued my interest in them was there was a study, they gave Google engineers a microdose and told them to go walk and then come back. And they could all solve problems they couldn't solve before. So my depression was heavy from like after my first surgery on. It was just there. Like I thought about death 20, 30, 40 times a day, every day for like 20 plus years. And I looked at it like a problem I couldn't solve. Like, you know what I mean? So I was like, oh, all right. So I asked one of my friends, I'm like, hey, can you get me some LSD? And they're like, why do you want that? And I was like, well, this is what I want to do with it. I'm like, oh, that's weird. So I took a tab of 150 microgram paper and I mixed it in 10 cc's of vodka. And I would drop 10 on an insulin unit, squirt it underneath my tongue. And I started microdosing. I started journaling. And then I was able to start detaching from the memories that were haunting me. And I could really sit outside of them and look at them. And slowly, it's like I tell everybody, if you have a really dusty window, it was just slowly getting cleaner and cleaner. The analogy I used in my book was if you're in a room and it's one filing cabinet and on the floor is tons of files and you don't know where they go, microdosing helped me put them back in the cabinet
I like that.
and help me start filing it better. I did macro trips. I think microdosing is way superior to macro. Just because the macro is so earth shattering, ego dissolving that it'll scare most people.
Yeah.
And we've had Paul Austin on. He does the third wave. He was on the Excellence Cartel a while back, a couple years ago. And he even has talked about that more and more, that there should be more talk about the microdosing of them. So LSD was more of a creative problem solving drug for me. Shrooms microdosing was more of a what is going on the shadow side of me. And I was tinkering back and forth and I was just cycling them, one this, one that. And I've been doing it over the course from 2017 on. And it has been the most impressive and freeing substances I ever found. And for me to sit here and say, like, yeah, man, a Schedule 1 drug did it was really kind of sad. You know what I mean? Like, it was really sad. I could have figured it out myself, but I needed them at that time in my life. I haven't used any this year, which is sad because they do make things a little bit better. I won't lie there. But yeah, it was like a problem I couldn't solve. I think that's most people's depression. There's like this heavy wet blanket that's on you and you can't figure out why the damn thing's on you. And it slowly gave me the peace to be able to do that. And I would encourage anybody, if you've been using, any kind of antidepressants, anti-anxieties, and it's not giving you the answers you want, you have to be off them. And I would tell people to look into the microdosing. And you're going to hear it because people are like, oh my God, I'm going to microdose. I'm back, look, it's Pandora's box when you play with these things. You don't know where you're going to get. I have massive concerns about it in our culture today because trauma is a word that everybody uses. When my mom was mean to me and made me get straight A's, traumatized me. What the fuck do you need a psychedelic for that?
Yeah.
I had a grandpa who was a World War II vet who literally I was in a body cast and he treated me like a fucking POW when I was 8 years old. I had surgeon turn my leg and break my leg, and the response to me getting away, they piled more people on top of me. I've had some deep shit that I just couldn't get rid of. That's what it helped me with. I didn't forget the memories. I think that's important for people to know. I just was able to put those memories in a spot that I was able to make peace with them. And here's the other thing. People will often confuse this too. It doesn't erase those. You're still going to think about that shit. The thing is now, rather than upsetting me, I'll be like, well, why am I thinking about that? What's going on around me for me to bring this up?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, it's just because it's a work thing and and it's me feeling like I'm still insignificant somewhere. And fuck that, I'm fine. You know what I mean? And you just learn to make better peace with sitting with it. And I tell everybody, I'm like, look, if you're scared of them, the microdosing is the way to go. And there's a whole book about it. It's called Microdosing Psychedelics by Paul Austin. And there's a lot of material out there. And I think, what was it? Change Your Mind, Change Your Perspective by Dr. Michael Pollan. Or Michael Pollan is a really good book too. It's out there.
I concur with everything you've said there. I actually delved into microdosing through a friend recommending it when I was going through a divorce. I was in a very bad spot with coming away from that. And the first time I microdosed mushrooms, it was life-changing. It was just, it was like a sense of freedom because I actually had to live with my ex-partner once we'd, decided, or I'd decided, should I say, and we lived together still for 10 months. And it was, as you can imagine, a tricky time. And it was the only thing that just gave me relief and like I could sleep and it was crazy. Although, however, like you've sort of touched on, one day I did a bit too much and it turned into like a trip and a bird came out of a painting and it was hella crazy. And it was like, fuck. So, of course, there is that macro, micro, but it gives you freedom, doesn't it?
Freedom is a great word. I think what it did was allow me to stand up and then realize the chains that were holding me were very unnecessary. And I was able to kind of be like, I don't need these anymore. They don't serve me. And I think it's very much in our blood to be depressed. I think it's very much in our blood to kind of be like, holy shit, that's negative. And we think about it. I can probably count out 10 negative memories I have compared to probably one positive. I almost think we're like wired that way. So I'm like, these things have to be here for a reason. And if you look throughout time, they were there and then they got erased and then they got there and they got erased. Like Paul says, it's the third the third wave for a reason, because you had psychedelics and then they got moved away, and then you had them again, they got erased. It's very, I guess, freeing, like you said. I don't know. I look at them as special. Uh, Everyone will be like, "What? They're drugs?" I'm like, "They're not drugs. Like, they're here for a reason." You know what I mean? And they're naturally occurring because LSD is derived from ergot root, which is apparently what the mysteries of Delphi, what they would do down there. So the oracle, when the Spartans would ask to go to war, whatever they were, the oracle of Delphi would consult, and it was ergot root that breaks down to 25, whatever LSD is. And
Mhm.
that's what they were consuming. There's actually a really book called The Immortality Key, which they speculate that Jesus and all them, they stole the mysteries, and it was basically they stole the ergot root and they were passing it. And then what happened was they were giving it to everybody, and then, well, shit, I don't need to go into the kingdom, because the biggest quote that Jesus was remembered for was, "Why don't you open up the temple to everybody?" It was very secret, and that was one thing that they always had these questions about. And I don't know, I've just read so much now about it that I'm like, once you take him, I need a macrodose. I'm pretty much a very agnostic person, but I cannot deny that there is something on the other side that's greater than us. I don't know if that's God. I don't know what the hell that is, but I can tell you there's something else there. And whenever you do like a macrodose, depending upon what the trip is, people say there's bad trips. And I'll be honest, I've had a few of those, and I don't think they were bad. I think they were part, when I reflected on them weeks later, not days, weeks, it was things that I needed to address that were just brought out in the weirdest of ways. You know how your dreams are real fucked up? It's almost like that. And then you'll be like, a few weeks later, be like, huh, yeah, that dream, and you'll like have this moment of clarity. Psychedelics and macrodoses did that for me, but history is littered with it. And I didn't think it, I think if they weren't meant to be here, they wouldn't be here, just like pot. So
Yeah, for sure. I also think that sounds like you would agree, the intention of what you're using the drug for does set out a lot of what actually occurs in the trip. If you're macrodosing, if you go into it and you're like, I'm gonna get absolutely fucked, and you're hyper and everything else, it's gonna potentially exacerbate that. If you're on a real downer and then you head into a trip, that could exacerbate that, of course. And I find if I'm
exactly.
yeah, if you're really chilled and it's like, I'm going to do this in a really comfortable surrounding at home, I feel really, at peace. And then I have whatever it may be, mushrooms, LSD. It's a very different response I've found in my own personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Now I'll share something with you, which I talked about in my book. After I did that podcast with Paul, a gentleman reached out to me on Instagram. So this is me trusting strangers with drugs. And he was like, "Hey, I'm in Nashville coming weeks for a conference." He goes, "I'm actually MDMA certified to use MDMA with people in California." He was out of California. And so they were using it with soldiers. So from where I wasn't held for the first 6 weeks of my life. So like I didn't bond with my mom. I didn't bond with my dad. I don't probably produce zero oxytocin, like the oxytocin. There's like none of that in my body. When my oldest son would lay and touch me, it used to fucking really bother me. I used to be like, what the fuck? Why is this person on me? And like, I was very cold. Sex was just a process that I
Transaction.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, in action. And I did one thing of MDMA, and I can now actually like have someone hold my hand, have my kid put his head on my shoulder and not freak out. So I'm like, well, what changed? So there has to be something about these. And I'm looking forward to a world where we actually like look at it in a way that it makes sense, and rather than just being like, okay, we're going to get them and they're going to massively control them. That's my biggest fear. I think more people should have access to them. But then the question becomes, what does that do to big pharma? Like if they get all those drugs taken off. So
Yeah.
that's a whole nother question for another day. But I've
Yeah.
done every single one of them with the exception of ayahuasca, and they all provide their own unique journeys, including peyote.
Yeah, for sure. Have you delved into ketamine?
I did do that once. I did not like being in the K-hole. It was very, very weird to just watch myself. Like, you know what I mean? And it was weird. I couldn't really float through the thoughts or the space and time, like they say. I was just very much like stuck. I was just like, oh, this is boring.
Yeah.
It didn't do anything for me. I think where they're using it now is people who are very amped, like manic, and want to kill themselves. Because here in the States, you could go and they'll give you a dose of ketamine and knock you right out, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Again, it's that like individual response. I've got a friend that she's just not good on ketamine. She still will do it, and she has a bad trip every time. But
yeah.
you know, it's a terrible time for her. But that individual response to all of these, you know, what we're talking about here, and ayahuasca is something I haven't done, but where you mentioned that, me and my partner are really intrigued by that. Is it something that you think you will try?
So I want to pick the right person to guide me through it because it's such a spiritual journey. So before COVID, Dorian Yates used to do ayahuasca retreats
No.
and he would guide you through it and he don't do it no more. And I was like, well, that was the one me and my buddy wanted to do. Cause I was like, well, if anyone's going to guide me, it's motherfucking Dorian.
Oh my God.
Not some
Can you imagine
shaman out
that?
of Brazil. Yeah, no. And I've heard mixed bag about ayahuasca, and I've had friends of mine being like, "You do so much shrooms and LSD anyway, Jeff. I don't know if it'd do anything for you." I think shrooms are the better one for most people, just because it's so. I don't know. It's a journey with yourself. Like the thoughts you have is all with yourself. They're not in, like with LSD, you get a little inspired by shit. You'd be outside. Like I tell everybody, when you microdose on LSD, food tastes a little bit better, sky's a little bit bluer. And I relate it to this. It's like, you remember the old TVs that were boob tubes, as we used to call them? If you think of everyday life as living through a boob tube, LSD just put me into HD.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like living in high def. So,
Mm.
and because of that, you see life for what it is. The birds sound a little bit prettier, the flowers bloom a little bit better. It makes you just appreciate what you have, the moments and things like that. And I think that that's what we could use more as a society is those slowdowns, those breaks. You're
Mm.
seeing people, as you know, from coaching, they can't even, rub two sticks together and hope for the best. They're just under so much pressure. And I think that's where these drugs could really do well. People who are burned out, people
Mm.
who just are completely disconnected and are trying to reconnect. I think it could do really well.
Yeah, for sure. I'd imagine you were talking about MDMA there as well in regards to PTSD and how it can help there with that route. And I found as well with microdosing mushrooms, you spoke about sex being like almost like an action and not having that connection.
Right.
Microdosing mushrooms and having sex is pretty phenomenal in my mind.
Yeah, no, I mean the same for microdosing LSD because you're present.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like the one thing I love about when I was microdosing, and you know this as coach, you live by that phone. The phone controls you. If you don't let the phone control you, you don't have a business.
Yeah.
And I own a gym, 1,000+ members. I've got 90-ish clients, plus everything else, plus teams. That phone controls me. When I microdose, I can put the phone down and not give two shits about it for a while.
Yeah, it's so free, and like we said earlier, freedom. But it's like I don't know about you, but even when you microdose, when you look at your phone, it's like it throws you off, doesn't it? And it's like, well, I'm not going to be able
Yep.
to do anything productive here, so let's
Yeah.
put the phone away.
Yeah, it's almost like you don't want to be on it. You're like, why am I on this? Look, like, you know what I mean? That's how I was with it. I'm like, why the fuck am I on it? I throw it back. My favorite's to microdose and go on a kayak and
Right?
just cruise down a little river for a few hours because it's just chill. It's a very nice way to reset. I think microdosing works well in the reset mode because you're able to work through those problems, like I had said.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd be interested to know your take on like what people would associate as come down. So of course that's more from like a macro dose, but I try
I
and
have
frame it.
issues with that. Not
Yeah,
on the microdose.
yeah, and because come down wise, I try and frame it as like more okay. So we're going to have a reflection the next day if you do a big trip and be around the right people and don't book in a shitload of work that next day and just try and chill. But I think that some people are like, oh, you get this come down and it's terrible and drugs are really bad, you know?
Well, I mean, if you smoke meth, yes, you're going to get a come down.
Yeah, yeah.
But I've never had a come down coming off of those drugs. Maybe that's my response to them.
Mm.
But I have never had it where the next day I'm like, holy shit, I feel like I'm in beaten with baseball bats. Never had that.
Yeah, for sure. And if you were talking to someone about microdosing, I'm sure you've had plenty of conversations. Is it something that you sort of delve into as a coach and say, this is how I would do it? Or how do you sort of?
I don't delve into it with coaching as people have to approach me about that privately.
Mm.
Just because I think when you get a lot of clients you have to remember your hope for the hopeless.
Yeah.
And people who are hopeless, when they're willing to do anything, it's a little scary
Mm,
sometimes, you know? And so I try to work with people where they're at. But the people who suffer from mental health, like a couple of alcoholics who've approached me, sex addicts, things like that, I'm just real honest with them. And I'm like, hey, this is how I would do it. Here's some great resources. Here's some good podcasts to listen to. Best you can do is educate yourself. No different than steroid use.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, here. And I'd also be really interested to know as well in regards to mental health. This is something I maybe haven't delved into as much with male competitors, but how you find the post-show period. When I have spoken about it on the pod before with males, it's very, very interesting for me to hear from your point of view.
Ooh, well, you're talking to a guy when I normally get off post show, I don't ever have the blues. I just look at like another goal to go towards. And I think that that's the important thing. Like at the end, the last couple of weeks before my shows are done, I'm already thinking about what I need to be doing next.
Nice.
And I think that that helps you land the plane a little bit easier
Mm.
because I'm like, look, you're already peeled 2 weeks out if you're doing it right. You know what I mean? So why not start thinking about the future? Just live in the moment. Like my girlfriend was laughing at me at Master. She's like, God, you're so relaxed. And then I fell asleep backstage. They like came over and were like, hey, Welter's line up. I'm like, oh yeah, sorry, I was sleeping, you know? And like, I don't know. I've never had that. The few clients I have had that with, I think it's because they thought they should have got a placing that they shouldn't. So they attached their worth to that number. And I think that induced the blues in them more than anything.
Mm. And would you say that
But
mental health wise you've had any, so post show you're pretty cool with, is there any challenges either like in prep or off season or anything associated with mental health that you do struggle with or not really?
no, I'll be honest with you. My years of psychedelic use in the microdosing form really, really cleaned a lot of that up. I know who I am. I like what stares back at me when I look in the mirror, and I still keep promises to myself.
And
I make them and I keep them.
but I must ask you with that, with body image, is there any tips for people that are listening? Because it's of course massive in physique development and in our realm. Is there anything that you would sort of give advice to someone that does struggle with body image? I know it's quite a broad.
It's such an asshole answer I'm going to give, though. So, my
Well,
12-year-old just hired his coach. He's going to work with Cameron Cheek. He wanted to do bodybuilding. And I explained to him, I was like, you will never look at food the same. You'll never look at other people the same. And you will never look at yourself the same. And you have to accept this if you're going to go down this road. And it's going to always be in flux. There's going to be a season when you're fat and you feel like someone could grab onto the fat on your back and fuck you good from behind. And there's going to be seasons when you're so peeled that you can't even, like, it's like pinching the top of your skin. You're so damn lean on the top of your hand, you know? And I tell a lot of clients that, like, you know, the body image, I presume probably maybe women more than men, but I know men suffer from it a lot. Um, but I think that's part of understanding what you're getting into. It's like playing football. Like, you know, not the football soccer, but I love football over here in America. You're going to go running down that field and you're going to potentially get hurt and there's going to be potentially issues and so forth. And one day you have to retire. You have to understand that if you really want to do this to the max, you're going to have to go through all the layers, all the levels at all the times and get through it. I think it's better to have the discussion of what people are getting into and being like, if you already struggle with your body as a female at 18% body fat and you walk around like that year round, probably not a good sport for you to get into. And I have those conversations with people. I'm like, but if you want to really do this, then you've got to accept all the seasons that come with it. I don't know. I think that, again, I think we put too much emphasis on the things we're told. Like, I don't know. I'm one of those people like, will we even know about the body image stuff? Like, if people didn't talk about it all the time, will we even think about it?
yeah, social media.
Because I never really thought about it as a kid when I got in a bodybuilding. I'm like, okay, I got to get fat and then I got to get lean. Like, it's just like part of it. Like, I just kind of just looked at it like that. Winter's hoodies and summer's tank tops,
Yeah,
you know, and I just kind of, I don't know. I think having my son and talking to him about it, I was just like, you'll never look at food the same. You'll never look at yourself the same and other people. And as long as you're okay with that, it's part of it. And I think that we want to try to hold hands and band-aid people. And sometimes it's like, look, this is a very niche thing you're trying to do. And with niche comes a lot of good and a lot of fucking bad. And if you can't handle the bad when it's good, then probably not for you.
Yeah,
It's
such
like
a
trying to build a business. If you can't deal with fucking being broke a lot to build something great, you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur and get into business.
yeah, like building a body, isn't it? And it some of the spots that you do visit, it sounds like you've got it pretty level-headed, and of course, that takes some work a lot of the time for most people. Some of the listeners are going to be first timers listening, thinking, this is my first prep and this is so fucking hard. I want to eat my own hand, and and then they have the post-show period and it's real tough. But I always bring it back to, if you're in this journey to really develop your own physique and explore that and explore yourself, like, there's something that just keeps you going, isn't there?
And that's what it goes back to for me. Like, why do you have post-show blues? The goals don't stop.
They don't.
No. And you should take your off season just as seriously as you take your comp. And that's where a lot of people mess this up. So I just put on my story today where I put 30 pounds on in 5 weeks, and I'm still pretty lean, and I've done an aggressive reverse, right? And a lot of people wouldn't be able to do that. But I just know, like, hey, because if you're a first-time competitor, here's the deal. I'll give you a little hint. You're going to eat all that food and you're going to be fucking sick and feel like shit. And then you're going to get fat from it. And in about 2 weeks, you're going to look like you never competed.
Yeah.
You just got to remember, it's like prep. That food's still going to be there. Eat the good stuff just the same. And that's why I think it's a lifestyle. Yeah. And I think if you don't approach it from a lifestyle, you're going to get some really skewed fucking problems along the way. But, like I said, I'm an asshole. And I feel like you're always going to struggle with body image if you're in this sport. It just is what it is. And to blame it on post-show and all this other shit, I'm like, no. Like, this stuff was kind of there before, and this is part of the game. And I don't know. I feel like as a coach, I'm just kind of like, hey, not for everybody, but I'm at least going to be honest to you. Yeah. And not lie to you. This has been my experience, and you're talking to a guy. I mean, I was told I pretty much never walk again without AIDS, and I walk across bodybuilding stakes. So guess what? I'm real fucking happy to be able to keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing what I love doing. And I think if more people looked at it like that, they'd probably have better experience. Yeah. And it goes back to this, like, complaining and, oh my God, this is really hard and whatever. Yeah, it is hard at times. And really, it's meant to be hard. Yeah. And that's why it's called this sort of extreme sport that it's labeled. And generally, I'm sure you'll agree that nobody really cares if you're suffering in a prep that you're doing through your own choice. This is you choosing to starve yourself, and it's like, come on now, there's people that are actually starving and they don't have a choice, and this is a privilege for us to do this, isn't it? Yeah, I tell everybody, I'm like, it's so fucked up. I'm starving myself willingly when 80% of the world population can't do that willingly. And we get kicks off it, don't we? It's fucking cool. Yeah, no, that's why I said, like, I'm able to compete and do something that they never said, and I don't do bad at it, and that's what keeps me going. I think you have to find out what really keeps you going in order to do this. If you can find out what really keeps you going in order to do this, then you're probably going to be okay with it. But stop blaming it on everything else. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. I don't follow a lot of coaches on social. I don't follow a lot of fitness and health shit. And I think I follow a lot of sports. I follow a lot of my friends, and I follow a lot of car stuff. Yeah. And I think that makes it slightly more enjoyable for me. Yeah, for sure. Because you don't need to comparison and all of this, Sometimes when you're entering a competition and you maybe know some of the other competitors in your category, it can be quite cool because they're going to be there. But it's like, well, I can only be me as a genetic individual. So I go and turn up like you, let's get fucking shredded, have a sick day, whatever the placement is, and then we're on to the next guy. And I think that that's a very good message to put across. And with your book, before we wrap up, is so for the listeners that are thinking, oh, I want to hear more and hear more of your story, where are we at with the book at the moment, Jeff? So the book is completely done. It's in the second round of line editing. When I get it back, it's a matter of, I got to put it into Adobe to basically line up some stuff because I have to do hard print. So I'm going to go through Amazon for the soft paperback and the Kindle, and then I'm going to do a book publisher for the hard copy, where I'm going to sign them and mail them out to people. So that's pretty much what it is. Yeah, I was telling you before we went live on the air. live on Zoom, not live on the air. I sound like
No, we're
like it's
like,
better than what it is. Um, I invested my money in Scribe, who did "Can't Hurt Me" by David Goggins. They went belly up in May, and I lost my 18,000. They were supposed to do it all for me, so rather than just pick, my friend Stephen Pressfield, who's a New York Times bestselling author, any coach listening to this, you need to read the book Turning Pro. It talks about the amateur to the pro conversion and how to beat resistance, which is a fucking phenomenal book. It completely changed my life. I read that book at the end of every year before I go into the new year to reset aim, because it's very easy to want to go back to your shadow amateur career and kind of hide away from the destiny you're meant to follow.
yeah,
But I'm looking for that book to come out later this year. You guys can follow me, Jeff Unbreakable Black, on Instagram, and I'll be announcing a lot of that stuff. I will say this. That book was my PhD in life on myself. I looked at that book when I got done with it. And I read it and I was like, not bad, not bad. Where I'd been real hard on myself before then. So there's one thing I tell people that writing this book taught me. You should always take your thoughts to paper, because until then, they'll just confuse you. But when you start writing them, guess what? That shit sorts out. And once you can start sorting it out, you're left less confused. Go for it. I think I tell all my competitors, write daily. And here's the deal. People be like, what the fuck do I write about? I'm like, I don't know. One day I remember in my journal, I wrote about like, I just took a massive shit. I feel great. And Before I know it, like I'm going down a rabbit hole of why I didn't go become a professional guitar, like go become a professional guitar player and shit. And I picked dumb bodybuilding. It's not always supposed to be easy. It's like going to the gym. Not every day you pick up a weight, it's going to feel good. It's the act of doing it that's the release. And writing has really helped sort that out for me. And I think when you can really sort out your thoughts, they don't confuse you.
yeah, I love that. Like, I've looked back at old prep diaries and I'm reading it thinking, I was in some fucking messed up place right
Yeah.
like you say, I haven't been to the toilet for 3 days. I've just been to the fucking toilet.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I burned all my journals that went into the contribution of my book when I got done writing my book, because they no longer represented me.
For sure. Yeah.
And I tell everybody, like, you can go back, look at your journals for fun, but some people torture themselves with that shit. And I'm like, you're not the same person you were an hour ago, let alone like a month ago or even fucking a year ago. And so many people are afraid of doing great things because of the time that you slept with someone you shouldn't 17 years ago, or did cocaine out of a stripper's asshole, or whatever the hell.
Amen.
And they have all this shame and guilt. And I'm like, look, like when I tell people this, like when I coach, I'm like, I will never shame or guilt you. You're going to do a damn good job of that yourself.
Yeah.
My goal is to help you see the exit out of that.
Yeah.
And there's empowerment when you know the exit out.
I love that. What a way to wrap up, Jeff. You're an absolute legend. I had a feeling this was going to be a good one because I too believe in the universe, and I feel like Austin and the universe has delivered us here today. So thank you so much for today. It's been super fucking cool, and it's going to be going live soon. So I really do appreciate your time, and maybe we get you on for a second episode in the future, of course.
Oh, I'd love to. I enjoyed the chat. It was refreshing because, you know, it's normally when you chat with people, you never know where it can go, and it gets down these like boring drills, but where it's like a dungeon of shit. And today was just very refreshing because when I show up to these podcasts, I just want to be me. You know, I'm the guy that you'd sit next to at a bar. I'll talk to you about God, politics, anything in between, because I don't know, like the world. So I'm just a curious person now. I went from being afraid of it, being fearful, to being fearless. And I think when that shift happened, I'm like, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to live. When it's time for me to go, it's time for me to go. Until then, I'm just going to enjoy my little ride here.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people need to, you know, well, not need to, I don't want to enforce it on people, but, you know, when you listen to our chat today, it's like, you can just chill and do whatever your vibe is. Do what you want to do. It's your life, and, you know, limits are there for us to break through, hence your name Unbreakable. You know, it's crazy what we do to imprison ourselves, and then when you realize, which is what I love about Class A's, actually there's a new reality that you can form, and I think that we're both advocates of that from what we've spoken about. So thank you so much, mate. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. I gotta tell you real quick before we wrap this up, you know how I got that nickname, Unbreakable? My team gave me a Cardillo weight belt that says Unbreakable inscribed on its back up on the right side. And it was 4 weeks out from my 2016 show. I was doing Mr. Knoxville, Mr. Tennessee, and I was squatting, and I broke my femur around my rod on my 7th rep, and I caught it coming down. And I laid there for a second, was like, fuck, this is how it ends, huh? All right. I said, fuck that. So I crawled over the leg press, and I couldn't do a rep on that. So I took myself to the step mill, and I jumped on the step mill and did one leg at a time for 60 minutes straight. I sent my pictures to Jason the next day, and I have it on the end. It's in my book, and I sometimes post it to remind people. Jason goes, Jeff, are you sure? And I'm like, just fucking call the offense, and I'll get this shit done. And I went back for week 3 and 4 weeks out from that point, placed second back to back, and you wouldn't have known I did it. And at that point, I was just like, you really can do anything you put your mind to. Perhaps meant to challenge you, and that's why you have a choice. You can either quit, submit, or get better. And I chose to get better.
And get even more conditioned next time. Get fucking peeled.
Yep. 100%. I showed up with striated glutes and everything. And like, you didn't even notice. And Jason was like, I don't know how you did it. And it hurt when I was posing, but it was just, I was enjoying the moment. I was like, I had to finish what I had to finish for myself, because I don't break promises with myself. I think that that's the fastest way to get a life not worth living.
Yeah, don't have regrets, or rather than it being regrets, reframe it as, what can I fucking learn, and how can I move forward? You know what I mean?
100%.
Love that. You're a fucking legend, mate. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope you can take me back on, and if anyone's got any questions, feel free to hit me up. You guys can ask away on my IG. I don't mind a bit.
For sure. Thank you, Jeff. Thank
you, Sarah.
And I will speak to you soon.
Yes, ma'am. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.